On the road to Islamabad, presidential negotiator Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner due to meet Iran's foreign minister for round 2 of war talks. Expectation meter set to low. An American soldier with inside information about the raid that captured Nicolas Maduro made more than $400,000 on Polymarket. Now, that soldier faces an array of federal felony charges. Prediction markets run amok or properly self-regulating. We explore. Influencers and journalists, do they compete? Do they exist in silos? Can collaboration lead to breaking big stories? The fall of Eric Swalwell might be a case study in all of that. We take a look. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout, and let me welcome you to our newsroom studio on the second floor here at the D.C. Bureau. The big show, that's the CBS Evening News with my colleague Tony Takeout, is in town and therefore temporarily subletting our main studio. I will nevertheless soldier on without the reassuring presence of our gumball machine, golden takeout tie rack, or candy dishes. Trust me, it's harder than you might think. So, you want to talk? The White House said today the Iranians are eager to talk and that it senses a possible path, emphasize possible path, to ending the war. A couple of hours after Iran announced its foreign minister was heading to Islamabad, Pakistan, the White House said President Trump was dispatching Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner for negotiations. Vice President J.D. Vance, who attended the first round of these talks, is remaining in Washington.
The Iranians want to talk. They want to talk in person, and so the president is, as I've said many, many times to all of you, always willing to give diplomacy a chance. So Steve and Jared will be heading to Pakistan tomorrow to hear the Iranians out. We hope progress will be made, and we hope that positive developments will come from this meeting.
The teams on both sides appear a bit thin, so if there's anything highly technical that needs to be hammered out, this may not be the meeting to resolve it. It may be a meeting to get to another meeting. How satisfactory this proves for Trump, well, talk about an X factor. The president insists he is in no hurry at all to strike a deal. And he further insists all the pressure and incentives are with Iran. Islamabad round 2 will most certainly put that theory to the test. And what about the Strait of Hormuz, you might ask? Still closed. Energy flows, petroleum and liquefied natural gas still strangled. Global energy markets under increasing supply and price stress. The United States Navy is now fully empowered to attack any Iranian boat laying mines or otherwise antagonizing shipping.
These Iranian terrorists are running around like pirates in the Strait, and President Trump, as commander-in-chief, has given the green light and authorization to the Department of War to take lethal and kinetic action if they deem necessary. If these boats are threatening U.S. assets in the region, they will absolutely be dealt with accordingly.
It is a pressure cooker. Iran inside a military and economic vice, the White House staring down high gas prices, stubborn inflation, declining consumer confidence, and some of the worst approval ratings Trump has ever seen. We begin tonight with Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Ed, take it away.
Well, the word that the special envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, are flying tomorrow back there, as Caroline Levitt put it, to hear Iran out, certainly appears to at least show the world that the United States is willing to listen. But the fact that the vice president is not heading suggests that these talks may be preliminary or somewhat meant to indeed just feel them out and see how serious they may be about proceeding towards some kind of substantive agreement. The president is on his way to Florida tonight for a political event. He'll be back here again tomorrow night, of course, for the big dinner, White House Correspondents' Dinner. As he was leaving, the vice president was spotted out on the driveway here taking a phone call from who else? The president, according to some photographs of him. A photo was held up and it said Donald Trump on it. So they were conferring about what? Unclear. But again, these two envoys heading there, it at least creates the prospect that diplomacy will continue. But the fact that the Pentagon is pushing on this idea that the blockade is now global and that it stretched into the Indo-Pacific this week is certainly a sign that they're maintaining the military options as well and waiting to see how, if at all, this logjam breaks.
And Ed, there's an interesting sequence of events worth noting. Yesterday at the White House, delegations from Lebanon and Israel agreed to extend their ceasefire for 3 weeks. That was a priority of the Iranians. 1 day later, these talks recommence. That seems to be worth noting.
It is, and we were in the Oval Office as your broadcast was beginning. That's why I was absent from class last night, as serving as pool on behalf of the networks here. And it was a considerable achievement for the president to at least get the Lebanese and Israeli envoys in the same room to agree to a 3-week extension of the ceasefire, with the expectation that the leaders of those two countries are going to come here to Washington to hammer out final details. In that setting, suggesting that perhaps this could lead to broader peace, but never explicitly asked, was this a condition of ongoing talks with Iran? And yet, yes, as you point out, they're now on their way tomorrow to continue those conversations. So, if ultimately this is leading towards diplomacy, or at least getting people in the room, certainly much of the world's going to be pleased to see that. Whether or not it relieves all the economic pain that this has created, not here just in the United States, but around the world, analysts and those following things, when it comes to supply chain, oil supply, gas prices here at home, and the broader effects it'll have, suggest it's going to be a while till things get put back together again.
Ed O'Keefe, I did note that absence, but it has been recorded as fully excused.
Good. Thank you.
Ed O'Keefe at the White House, thank you very much. Former National Security Advisor to President Trump in his first term, Robert O'Brien, joins me now. Robert, it's great to see you. Thanks for being on the program. Tomorrow will be 8 weeks of this war. Evaluate what it has achieved and what has yet to be done.
Well, Major, thank you for having me. I think the major achievement of the war is the military destruction of Iran. I mean, the naval bombardment and the air bombardment, the campaigns were exquisite. I mean, all 10,000 targets on the air tasking order were eliminated. And that's a story that really hasn't been told. And, the Iranians have gone back to their playbook of extending and pretending and trying to negotiate and buy time. But the real story is the military victory of the United States. Now we'll see how the negotiations play out. But, up until now, the key factors are our win militarily.
You were part of, no doubt, some general discussions about what to do with Iran in the first term. Based on what you remember from those discussions, would you say what's achieved militarily so far is ahead of schedule, on schedule, behind schedule?
Look, I think it's something that we never expected would happen the way it has. I mean, our capabilities in the last 5 years have just advanced at a pace no one could imagine or has seen. So I think the military objectives are great. The difference between what we looked at and this campaign is the president's approach, and that is to give the Iranians a chance to surrender, a chance to kind of rejoin the international community, the chance to behave as a normal country. And so he took off the air tasking order the economic targets, Cargill and the oil production facilities, the oil storage facilities, the oil export facilities. That all remains intact. So the Iranians have a chance, if they play ball, to maintain that oil export business that makes $500 million a day. And that's the biggest difference between what we were looking at 4 years ago or 5 years ago and now.
And Robert, the president says he believes the regime has changed in Iran. Based on what you've seen, do you believe that's true?
Well, there's no question, Major, that the regime has changed. I mean, that's just a fact. The regime was wiped out on the first day of the war, thanks to Israel and the U.S. in a very exquisite operation. But the nature of the regime has yet to, we've yet to see a serious change in the nature of the regime. So they're hardliners. This, pitch that there are moderates and revolutionaries and hardliners. I don't buy it. All these diplomats and the Speaker of the Parliament were in the Guard in their early years. They're still assassinating and hanging and killing and executing women and young people in the streets. So the nature of the regime hasn't changed, but clearly the personnel have changed.
So that raises an important question, Robert. I'd like you to evaluate it. How confident could this administration be with any enforcement of any deal if the remainder of the Iranian regime is just as theocratic, just as devoted to the revolutionary instincts that started in 1979, and just as malevolently aligned against the United States and Israel? How do you deal with them, and how do you assume that you've struck a deal with them and they're going to enforce it?
Well, again, this goes back to Ronald Reagan. You can't trust a word that the Iranians tell you. And I've negotiated with them when I was a hostage envoy. They're disreputable. They're not trustworthy. They're every negative adjective you used. But we can trust, but verify. And so if we're going to strike a deal, for example, to get the uranium back, we're going to have to put U.S. boots on the ground or allied boots on the ground to literally seize the HEU, seize the enriched uranium, and bring it home. Or if it's buried, we're going to have to put it under cement and concrete and have verifiable monitoring of that site. So you raise a very good point, Major, and that is whatever agreement we strike with the Iranians that the president gets. I personally think there will be a deal because the Iranians have no cards to play. Other than delay, it will have to be subject to very strict verification rules.
Former National Security Advisor to President Trump in the first term, Robert O'Brien. Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Major.
U.S. Special Forces soldier was arrested Thursday. The charge? He had confidential information that he used to make more than $400,000 on the prediction market known as Polymarket. Federal investigators say Army Master Sergeant Gannon Ken Van Dyke bet on the capture of former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro hours before President Trump announced that raid. Prosecutors say Van Dyke was making these bets while helping the military plan and execute said operation. CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Skanga joins me to discuss this. What do we know, Nicole?
This is a fascinating case, Major. It's the first time U.S. prosecutors have ever accused someone of exploiting inside information for personal gain on a prediction market. And if people are wondering what the heck is a prediction market, we'll help them out. People bet on the outcome of everything from politics to weather on these platforms. In this case, we were betting on the capture of the former Venezuelan president. And it wasn't just anyone betting on his capture. It was a member of U.S. Special Forces who we are told by our sources was a communications specialist who was involved in both the planning and the execution of the capture of Maduro.
Privy to
what we call inside information.
Very important information.
Confidential information. And we look in this indictment, and it's a fascinating indictment, and we learn that he had signed multiple NDAs.
Non-disclosure agreements.
Non-disclosure agreements, essentially saying, I will not share this very sensitive government information. He made a series of 13 bets over the course of 6 days. The last bet happening just a day before, really hours before, the president announced the capture of Maduro. The bets amounted to about $33,000. He walked away with more than $400,000. And there are many charges here. Interestingly enough, no espionage, but we see unlawful use of confidential government information. We see fraud. We see making an unlawful monetary transaction. And, you know, it's funny, Polymarket came out with a statement saying that they tipped off the Department of Justice, that they have been cooperative throughout this entire process. And this is proof the system works.
They say.
I think a lot of people are saying, well, this is a clear high-stakes example of maybe why the system doesn't work. And it will be interesting to see, you know, this is really a landmark case for the United States. How do we deal with this in the future? Just a couple of days ago, Kalshi, another prediction market, kicked off 3 congressional candidates for betting on their own races. And so this is a brand new ball game, but it is a case that is so indicative of the times that we are living in. Now, these charges, they come with penalties, which, if convicted and sentenced, could be more than 50 years behind bars. I don't know that we'll get there for Master Sergeant Gannon Ken Van Dyke, but it will be interesting to see how things play out.
Nicole Skanga with all the details. Thank you very, very much. Dennis Kelleher joins me now. He is CEO of Better Markets, a nonprofit focused on, for the purpose of this conversation, really important financial regulation and transparency. So, Dennis, you heard Nicole say what Polymarket said. Proof the system is working. Evaluate that for my audience, if you'd please.
She did a great report. I'm glad she didn't hear me laughing when she was quoting Polymarket saying the system is working. This is really an extreme outlier of a case where very quickly after the betting was placed and Maduro was captured, it was all over the internet and elsewhere that there was this incredibly well-timed trade where somebody made a ton of money. It had all the classic earmarks of insider trading. It was a recently opened account. It was a recently funded account. It was in the money very quickly, and then the account was closed and the money was moved out of the account. And so I don't know whether or not Polymarket actually contacted DOJ or not, but the community that pays attention to these things outed this trader very quickly. I would bet probably long before Polymarket or anybody else. Now, we're all focused on this because it has such a high profile major, right? Like the capture and removal of Maduro. But, there's thousands, tens of thousands, millions of trades all day long going on in these gambling sites that are not high profile and people don't see them. And you can bet this is just the tip of the iceberg. And Polymarket is, let's remember, an offshore crypto-only company that makes money based on the volume of trading. So these so-called prediction markets, which itself is inaccurate, but leave that aside for a minute, but they make their money, they're profit maximizers. They maximize their profits by volume of betting. They're not in the business of preventing their gamblers from betting. They're in the business of creating as many bets as possible and getting as many people to bet as possible.
So when you describe the community watching this and flagging this, you're saying that's an example of the community raising an issue, but the community can't watch everything. So the idea of self-regulation is kind of mythology.
It's a complete misnomer. There is no self-regulation. So, for example, in this case, where you can see on the news that Maduro's captured and the president says he's captured, so you can then see when the bets are placed. And remember, for every winner, there's a loser. And so when I say the community's watching, that's because people lost a lot of money. He may have won 400,000, people lost 400,000, right? And that happens all day, every day, in much lower profile transactions and bets. And remember, they call these things prediction markets. They're not prediction markets, they're gambling sites. And it's no different than going to a casino or a street corner bookie and betting on an NFL game or anything else. And so what you have here is this massive, unregulated, almost entirely unregulated market. Polymarket, which is offshore, is not even subject to U.S. regulations. And by the way, they entered in 2022 a consent order with the CFTC because they had to agree not to let Americans trade and gamble on their site because that's illegal under U.S. law. And afterwards, it was discovered that Americans were betting on that site and they were violating potentially the consent order. The CFTC and DOJ was investigating them, and then they dropped the investigation in July of last year, shortly after Trump was elected.
So Dennis, I got about a minute. Paint me a picture of what proper, from your vantage point, regulation looks and sounds like.
So we know what it looks and sounds like because it was done for decades. Remember, this gambling has been unleashed on America without the involvement of a single elected representative looking at this. For decades, the states regulated gambling, and it's outlawed actually in more than 20 states. They did a very good job of doing it. This single company decided, well, I'm going to try and find a little loophole and claim that the CFTC regulates it, and I can just put it on an app on everybody's phone, and they can all gamble no matter what the law is. And that's wrong, and it should be stopped. We should go back to where we were 2 years ago, where the states regulated gambling and prohibited illegal gambling, and we didn't have either all this gambling or all this manipulation, insider trading, and by the way, all the other negative social consequences that we're seeing from this huge spike, this surge in gambling across the country, which has very serious societal implications. And yet it's all because this one company is exploiting a loophole, or a couple of companies are exploiting the loophole, and it's unregulated, unleashed. And I think what should happen is the American people's public representatives should actually have a say in what's happening if this is going to happen.
And we will see if that happens. Dennis Kelleher, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Major.
The investigation into Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell dropped. We will check in with Congress to see if this will now open the way for the president's nominee to be the next federal chair, Kevin Warsh, can be confirmed. Plus, the power of social media and the young women who used their platforms to bring more attention, unwelcome to Eric Swalwell and his downfall from pursuit of power. We'll talk about that online community and more. And tomorrow is National First Ladies Day. My conversation with Anita McBride, former Chief of Staff to Laura Bush, about the evolving role of First Ladies. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. The Justice Department, through the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the District of Columbia, this morning announced it was dropping criminal investigation of Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell over cost overruns related to renovations of the central bank's headquarters here in Washington. Now, the DOJ did not give a reason for this about-face, but it did mention an Inspector General investigation within the Federal Reserve. But this might clear a hurdle for President Trump's pick to replace Powell, Kevin Warsh, to be confirmed. Congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins me from Capitol Hill to catch us up on all that. What do we know, Nicole?
Yeah, well, what we're waiting for is a response from Senator Thom Tillis, because after all, he was a key senator who said that he would, in essence, hold or block Warsh's nomination from going through until this probe against current Fed Chair Jerome Powell was dropped. We have not yet heard from the senator yet. I know you spoke to him this week. I spoke to him this week, and he just said, that this probe into Powell was simply bogus, and he just didn't feel that it was warranted, that this was some low-level error, in his view, on the part of the Trump administration. And so kind of until that was dropped, he said that he would not move forward in supporting Kevin Warsh, even though this is someone he feels has sterling credentials, someone he said he would be willing to support. So that's really the key here. Will Senator Thom Tillis support Kevin Warsh's nomination now that this probe has been dropped? We did hear from Chairman Tim Scott, who is the head of the Senate Banking Committee. He said that he welcomes this new Inspector General review and also pledged to have the IG before his panel, once the report is complete, into these cost overruns at the Fed. But hopefully this could potentially clear the path for Kevin Warsh. I would note that he was just up here on Capitol Hill, not just for that nomination hearing with Chairman Scott, but shortly thereafter, he did meet with Majority Leader John Thune, who also said that it was important to kind of drop this probe and move forward because, as you know, time is really of essence here. Powell's term ends May 15th, so the hope is that they can move this confirmation forward as soon as possible so that Warsh potentially could be in place by then.
Nicole, as we await word from Senator Tillis, I want to remind you and our audience of what Senator Tillis said on this program Wednesday night about all this. Let's listen.
The independence of the Fed is a red line for me, and I'm standing in the way of having the financial markets, world financial markets, look at the U.S. in a very different way. So let's stop an investigation that's going to lead to nowhere. If we need to examine it and find actual criminal activity, I would do a referral if we found that. But just setting expectations, I think that that's virtually impossible.
Nicole, one of the things that might be holding all this up, meaning a statement from Senator Tillis one way or the other, is the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro, still left a possibility that she might re-engage on all this, depending on what the Inspector General finds. Perhaps Senator Tillis wants a definitive word from the Justice Department that this part of its inquiry is over.
Yeah, certainly that's possible, but Senator Tillis, for his part, also didn't rule out the need for an investigation. It was more or less how this was handled, how it was announced, how the Justice Department was going about this. And he, seemed open to congressional investigations potentially, which is why I think Senator Scott's statement is notable, because it does seem to suggest that, Congress may have a role to play in all of this in terms of probing some of these cost overruns, which, the senator has also expressed concerns about. But it was really just the way that the department handled this that really kind of ticked him off, if you will. So, again, we'll see what he has to say about all of this.
Ticked him off because, in his words, it looked political, not legitimate from an investigative point of view. That's the words of Senator Thom Tillis. Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill, thank you very much. Up next, the changing face of political influencers and how they're operating not only in social media spaces, but in tandem with journalists, and how this is affecting culture and politics. That's coming up here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. My next guest is co-founder of a social media company that does what a lot of social media companies do, connect young people. It's called Betches. Now, my team had a whole bet on whether or not I would even say that word. Betches. You okay with it, kids? You got it? Okay. It has an offshoot page called Betches News. See, I did it again. Isn't this fun? Focuses on engaging millennial and Gen Z Americans, mostly women, with politics and other news. Sammy Sage is here now, and one of the things recently carried on that platform were accusations against now former Congressman Eric Swalwell and once frontrunner to be the next governor of California, or near the top. Now he's seen all of that fall away because of this interesting relationship I want you to explain between influencers, things they talked about, things that spread online, and then so-called, and I are one, mainstream journalists stepping in to amplify and solidify what was being talked about.
So first, are you familiar with the concept of a parasocial relationship?
I am.
Okay, so I think that's really at the crux of this story is that creators and news influencers, whatever you want to call them, there is a relationship that's built with the audience that enables essentially really anyone to feel a sense of trust and a sense of knowing in a way that I think people don't necessarily get with the mainstream media.
There isn't anything hierarchical about it. They feel part of the same mission or the same ethic or the same cultural values, so they can talk to you. They feel free to talk to each other and exchange things.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you'll literally be DMing with someone privately. You know, you meet people they recognize you on the street, and it's also you don't start with 100,000 followers. You start really small. So if you've been with them for a long time, you really have a sense of, I know this person, I know what their values are like, and I think that, you know, it's no surprise that Americans have pretty low trust in, quote unquote, the mainstream media, and we can parse what that means.
Right.
But what I think that actually comes down to in practice is that there is this sense that accusations against Swalwell, and I think especially in D.C., which is where a lot of this came from, because a lot of this was with sort of work connections or people in the Capitol. And I think there was a sense that, you know, it had been looked into and people had maybe given up, or that there was not necessarily...
There was no way to break through.
Yes, and break through. And also there's this sort of incestuous culture in D.C. where, you know...
I've read something about that.
Yeah, I mean, things are normalized, I think. And from what I understand, women especially are afraid to ruffle feathers, because if they bring an accusation or bring something up, people don't necessarily believe them.
They may not be believed. Their career might be short-circuited.
Right.
Or they might just be ostracized socially, politically, or professionally.
Exactly. And I think that what happened here was that this relationship with, in this case, it was two creators who had originally kind of gotten this off the ground. But one of them, a friend of mine who you had mentioned, I had spoken to her and posted it, is that she had heard these rumors, and she had heard them from enough places and had them confirmed to be that there was some validity to them by a sitting congressperson. And at that point, and she knew that a lot of people knew them, and she was kind of just, I, in good conscience, can't let this be, and I'm just going to post about it. And if he sues me, then we'll take that process through. And that really started
And then
snowball
into this
effect.
process stepped mainstream journalists who worked on the story, followed it, confirmed it, published it, and then things really took off.
Yeah.
So is this a new paradigm possibly between influencers and the so-called mainstream media?
I hope so, because what happened there was, these accusers who knew these online personalities. It still wasn't just, okay, we're going to put it out there because we know. They helped them get legal resources. They helped them really take secure the life that they were going to have if they were now coming forward with these really serious accusations, and also found reporters that really treated the women with respect, that they trusted would get the story right and would actually fight to get it out there, against kind of all the efforts that were going against squashing it. And that, I think, made these women feel that they were taken care of and that someone was looking out for them. And if it's a paradigm, I don't know if you can engineer it, but I do think it is something that can work. And really, it's an opportunity to expand the fourth estate, so to speak.
Sammy Sage, I'm glad you came in. She has a book. I'm going to give you Democracy in Retrograde. In addition to that, thanks so much for coming and describing this emerging paradigm. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Still ahead, tech billionaires, Elon Musk, others, suddenly backing universal basic income. Are lawmakers who support that idea persuaded? Not exactly. We'll talk about that with our reporter panel next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Reporter panel time. You know how that delights me. Daniela Diaz covers politics in Congress for Notice, soon to be renamed The Star. Looking forward to that. Nicholas Wu, congressional reporter for Semaphore. Nicholas, let me start with you. So, I mentioned this going to break. Universal basic income. Andrew Yang has been on this program talking about it. It's an idea that many progressives have embraced. And now Elon Musk and some other in the tech community are kind of talking about it, too, as a hedge against layoffs as related to artificial intelligence. How is that being received on the big Capitol, on top of the Hill?
Well, I talked to several lawmakers who spearhead their own universal basic income bills. The idea is that the government in some way would provide some sort of guaranteed income for folks.
Cash instead of welfare, essentially. Cash direct payments.
Exactly. You know, $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, something like that for adults and children. But progressives I talked to were actually really skeptical of these tech billionaires coming out in favor of it. Because the thinking there was, you know, you have to pay for this somehow with taxes. AOC told me, you know, maybe you would have to pay for this with the tax on AI. And, you know, that's probably not something these folks would be down for.
And Daniela, you have some interesting reporting about the House Ethics Committee giving at least rhetorical support to evaluating and possibly changing the way investigations are conducted, the speed thereof, and especially how accusations relating to sexual misconduct on the Hill itself with staffers might be carried out.
Major, I think if anyone saw what happened with Tony Gonzalez and Eric Swalwell, they would all agree that that situation with the two lawmakers being investigated for, at least Tony Gonzalez, for months and leading to no conclusion and then leading to him having to resign when the pressure was there from leadership, it shouldn't be handled that way. There should be a process. It should be quick. They should be able to acknowledge that there was sexual misconduct with a staffer. So when I had multiple conversations with members on both sides on Capitol Hill, they were very clear that they thought that this situation needed to be reformed. They believe that it should be investigated should there be an accusation quickly. There should be more transparency. And they acknowledge that this is going to have to be potentially more staff on the ethics committee, revamp of how things are handled. But
because just to let my audience in on this, there is a sense at times the Ethics Committee has been designed to slow walk things.
Yes, definitely.
To not be a protection racket necessarily for members of Congress, but to go so slow as to see if the member of Congress can work it out on their own with their own constituents and not have to face a true reckoning from ethics.
And the bigger thing is if they resign, that investigation ends.
Right.
There is no due process when it comes to potential sexual misconduct or any sort of misconduct on Capitol Hill if a staffer resigns. So there's a lot of talk about how to handle that going forward.
And Nicholas, one of your colleagues wrote about the MAGA podcast universe, the war with Iran, and some separations that are now very easily detectable.
So my colleague took a look at all of these podcasts that President Trump had gone on during the election to check in and see how these the broverse of these guys felt about the war in Iran, and most of them were actually opposed to it. Which in some ways shows a changing of the tides against the president among all these folks who had not really been that political before, but then all of a sudden had supported the president heading into the election.
And it's not just Tucker Carlson; it's others of those who, maybe in various ways, not super hostile, but skeptical or just outright opposed because they don't think it's America first.
That's right. These folks saw the war in Iran as somewhat of a betrayal of the president's promises during the campaign to get out of wars and
not to start them in the first place.
Exactly.
And Danielle, you have some interesting reporting on immigration and some concerns from Senate Democrats about blanket holding off or stalling through the administration of asylum claims, if I have that right.
You have that right. The Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Major, sent a letter to the Government Accountability Office asking for the inspector, the acting inspector, to investigate why the Trump administration is continuing to hold processing legal applicants who are trying to stay in this country legally. So far, that's been on hold. There's a lot of questions that they want answered about how much this is costing, what this means for legal immigration on
What's
the economy.
happened to the fees they've paid?
The fees they've paid. This is affecting the economy, too. They want those answers as well. So we'll see if there's any response. I actually did ask DHS for an answer, whether they had any feedback on what these Democrats are asking for, and I did not get a response.
But if there is a changeover after the midterms, questions like these that maybe don't get answers now, Democrats, if they control the House or possibly even the Senate, would be in position to put more clout behind trying to get some of those answers. Daniela Diaz, Nicholas Wu, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming in. Have a great weekend. Tomorrow is National First Ladies Day. We keep track of things like that here. Next, my conversation with Laura Bush's former chief of staff about, well, the importance and role, ever evolving, of First Ladies. That's next right here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Tomorrow is National First Ladies Day. Anita McBride was chief of staff to Laura Bush, First Lady. And she is currently the co-chair of the In Pursuit essay series, which honors the country's presidents and first ladies. Anita McBride sat down with us to talk about all this, and here's part of our conversation. Anita, I'm endlessly fascinated with the In Pursuit project, and what I've learned is so far, small sample size, but it's important, the essays about first ladies drawing more attention than essays about presidents.
Well, first of all, we're very grateful for your interest in Pursuit and helping us promote it, because it is getting traction, the essays on both the presidents and first ladies. But that is a very interesting statistic, and one that doesn't surprise me. It may surprise some of my colleagues or others. But there is a gap in knowledge and a gap in literature on first ladies. But they are having a moment. People are paying attention to their role in history. So I'm thrilled with these numbers.
And Anita, you have a very sharp perspective on this, having worked as the chief of staff to Laura Bush. There is this phrase, and I wonder if you're comfortable with it, soft power. It's just power. It's just a different kind. It's an alternate power, it seems to me.
I love the phrase soft power.
Okay, you do.
I do,
all right,
because, you know, it conveys a number of things. Here is this unelected position, and we have to be honest about that, right? You have to be careful that you're not crossing the line from policy advocate to policy maker. When that has happened in history, it isn't always received very well. But that doesn't diminish or lessen the influence that a first lady can have, either behind the scenes or sometimes more overtly. But it is a soft power, because not every problem comes to the desk of the First Lady, but it comes to the desk of the American president. So where a First Lady can help is powerful and influential.
let's start with the first one, Martha. No one knew how to sort this out. The imagery of it, the actuality of it. There was a constant debate about George Washington. Was he a king? Was he trying to create a king or around him? So if there's a king, there's got to be a queen, and she doesn't want that either, and they're both uncomfortable with that. They're struggling with it. Walk me through Martha a little bit.
Well, this is the burden of setting precedent for both of them, and this formation of a new nation, a new form of government that had never existed before, and it did fall on both Martha and George to create this new way that people, citizens, could live, where power is now vested in the people, not in the elected representative or his wife. But George Washington knew instinctively that his was a two-person job, as head of state and head of government. And as head of state, he needed the help of Martha Washington for the ceremonial duties, for creating the position in society and how this presidential partnership or this couple could operate. So lucky for George Washington, she was a very skilled hostess, and also had spent considerable time with General Washington in the encampments when he was fighting the Revolutionary War. So she, she was received in New York by President Washington, the new president, with great fanfare immediately, so that he could convey to the citizens of this new country her position was important. So she established sort of a social and societal network around her, where she combined this accessibility to the public, but also maintaining a certain level of formality so that this new country would be seen as on par with the great, powers of Europe.
We have a sense of Abigail Adams and John Adams that we don't of Martha and George because we have their letters.
Yes.
1,200 letters.
Extraordinary correspondence.
And as the essay about Abigail writes, writing a letter in those days was a much more involved process. It wasn't an email, it wasn't a text.
It wasn't a social media post.
No. It was a kind of oration of where you are and where your heart and head are in this particular moment. Because you're writing it all down.
That's right. Exactly.
And these two, Abigail and John, did that
for years.
Yes.
And think about the long separations that the two of them had, particularly he's helping to raise money for our Revolutionary War effort, or he's in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention Continental Congress. These long separations, in fact, the ones where he was overseas, she referred to as her widowhood.
Right.
But she was
and
helping.
she's running this enterprise in
That's right.
Braintree, Massachusetts.
That's
she is an entrepreneurial woman.
And educating
world.
her children
Yes.
and taking care, of her family, but also is an eyewitness account to extraordinary events in our revolution, including the Battle of Bunker Hill, which she, details. She and her young son, John Quincy, are watching that. And so that treasure trove of correspondence between John and Abigail is such a gift to history and documenting really the early years of our founding.
You can catch the rest of my conversation with Anita McBride on your favorite podcast platform. Time for our next CBS radio clip of fame. I told you last night we would at times lighten things up, and so we will. One of the most important journalists in CBS News history is, of course, Edward R. Murrow. We still have pictures of him in our hallways. Murrow was foundational to CBS News for a lot of reasons, but he will always be most remembered for his coverage of the prelude, the onslaught, and the horrors of World War II. In due course, I promise, we will have clips of Murrow from that harrowing era of news coverage on the radio. But first, we wanted to share something bouncier, something before the ravages of World War II engulfed the world. What you're about to hear is a clip from 1937 from a show called Saturday Night Swing Club. Murrow is not the host, but he is a narrator of one of the musical interludes. The show's announcer, for those really curious, was another famous radio name, Mel Allen. Remember, this was a time when radio was the dominant entertainment medium across all economic classes, and it was experimenting at this time with new technology, wires and frequencies that could span great distances, uniting performers and audiences across, for example, a vast ocean. Listen.
And so we say goodnight to Stefan Grappelli and Yango Reinhardt and their quintet of the Hot Club of France. They have been playing for you from the Bricktop Cabaret in Montmartre, Paris. This is Ed Murrow speaking and saying, swing it, America.
Swing it, America. That's an order from the Takeout. Happy Friday, everyone. This is the Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report, coming up next.